Hello students, in Unit 12.2 we are going to discuss how physiological needs impact our motivation. So if we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are at the most basic level, physiological needs. So because of this, we're first going to focus on hunger and what we call homeostasis, which we'll talk about in more detail later. But first I thought I'd introduce this unit with an interesting experiment on basic human motives concerning hunger and eating. Now, this experiment was conducted by Cannon and Washburn, and what they did is they had participants swallow a balloon to record stomach contractions and pushed a button to report hunger feelings. So what they would do, as you can see in the image, they'd have the subject swallow this balloon. They would then inflate the balloon while it was in their stomach to see if that would impact their sense of hunger. Hunger feelings came at a peak during the contractions of the balloon. All right, so as the balloon expanded, it stretched out the stomach, making the subjects feel full. And then when they contracted the balloon, the stomach was empty and stretched out, so they felt hungry as a result. However, this theory and the results of this experiment have largely been discredited because they didn't understand how the brain, especially the hypothalamus, influenced hunger. They thought, Cannon and Washburn that is, that hunger ultimately derived from the stomach, and that's not true. Hunger derives from our neural processing center, the brain. So let's first introduce the concept of homeostasis. Homeostasis is the tendency for an organism to keep their physiological system at a stable, steady level. The drive reduction theory seeks to maintain homeostasis. All right, so if you're thirsty, you'll drink. If you're hungry, you'll eat. And that will maintain a physiological equilibrium known as homeostasis. Glucose has a lot to do with homeostasis and regulating our physiological equilibrium. Glucose, as you may have remembered from previous units, is the simple sugar that is a source of energy. Most foods are converted to this after they're consumed. However, increased secretions of insulin from the pancreas can diminish glucose. And if glucose is diminished, we become hungry. So to sum up, if we eat food, we raise our glucose levels, which diminishes our insulin, which makes us feel full. It stops the secretions from the hypothalamus. However, if we go a long time without eating, our glucose levels will go down, our insulin levels will go up, and as the insulin pumps through our veins, it will gradually reach the brain, triggering the hypothalamus to make us feel hungry again so that we can increase our glucose and eat. Remember, the hypothalamus, which I've already mentioned, controls eating and other body maintenance functions. But there are specific parts of the hypothalamus that regulate hunger that you need to be aware of. The hypothalamus receives information regarding nutrient levels in the body. And there are two important parts of the hypothalamus that relate to eating and hunger, as pictured here. And they are the ventromedial and the lateral hypothalamus. All right. Here we see the lateral hypothalamus on the sides, and stimulation of the lateral hypothalamus is what makes us feel hungry so that we will be induced to eat. So if there's any damage to the lateral hypothalamus, we won't feel hungry ever, and there's a possibility that we'll starve to death. The ventromedial hypothalamus, which is located in the interior of the hypothalamus, is what makes us feel full. All right. So if we keep eating because of the secretions of the lateral hypothalamus, the ventromedial hypothalamus will eventually shut down the lateral hypothalamus, giving us a feeling of fullness, so we will no longer eat. All right. So here's a picture of a mouse who had the ventromedial portion of the hypothalamus lesioned. Because the ventromedial of the hypothalamus was destroyed, the mouse never feels full. He constantly feels hungry, and as a result, he is now morbidly obese, as you can see. So here we see the hypothalamus and how it impacts the stomach, the pancreas, which releases insulin, as we've said, and then how that is a big circulatory system for hunger and thirst. Now, I'm not going to elaborate too much on this because I'm expecting my group to elaborate in their presentation. The set point. The set point explains why people who lose weight tend to put it back on. The set point is the particular level of weight that the body strives to maintain. Obese people's set points are higher than the average range. The set point has a lot to do, or your particular set point has a lot to do with the basal metabolic rate, and this is the body's rate of energy expenditure while at rest. Right now, you're just sitting there listening to this video, but you're still expelling energy. You have to breathe. Your body has to maintain an internal body temperature. You have to use energy in your brain to comprehend what I'm talking about. That all requires energy. All right? And so that is what we're talking about with the basal metabolic rate, as you can see right here in this chart. You need to familiarize yourself with figure 12.5 in the textbook, as it is a great graph for hormones and hunger. It highlights that insulin released by the pancreas, normal secretions, is associated with hunger. Judith Rodin, the psychologist, did a landmark study demonstrating the mere sight and smell of food can stimulate the secretion of insulin, which can diminish glucose, making us hungry. Leptin, which is produced by fat cells throughout the body and released into the bloodstream, can contribute to obesity. If we eat a lot of glucose, or if we consume a lot of food and build up glucose, but we don't expend that energy, that glucose is going to be stored as fat. And then and if we want to burn fat, that fat is converted to leptin, which then we use as energy. So it's kind of like leptin is essentially a reserve of glucose. The mouse on the left, which lacks the gene needed to synthesize the weight regulation hormone leptin, outweighs 2 genetically normal mice. Without leptin, the animal overeats and becomes obese. Leptin is essential for the equal regulation of insulin and glucose. That whole process is illustrated here. You might want to pause the video and just study this image for a few seconds. So obesity. Obesity is the condition of being overweight, and it's the criteria varies widely. 20% over ideal weight is typically the universal definition for obesity, and is associated with health risks like breathing issues, cardiovascular disease, and others. There are some genetic explanations for obesity. Estimations have it that genetic factors account for 61% of variation in men and 73% of women. However, genetics does not determine how much fat you have typically. Genetics really more determines where the fat is stored on your body. So it might be stored in your arms, or it might be stored in your hips or your butt. You might have a lower basal metabolic rate because of your genetics, and so as a result, you have to exercise more than someone else who has a higher basal metabolic rate because of their genetics. So genetics has a huge impact, not only on our weight and our fat percentage, but also on how much energy our body expels at any given point. Fat cells. Now, this is a pretty interesting fact, and I'm probably going to break a lot of hearts with this, but once the number of fat cells increases, it cannot be decreased. The size of the cell can increase or decrease in size, but a fat cell itself, once it's created, cannot be destroyed. Causes for increase of fat cells are genetic predispositions, early childhood eating patterns, adult overeating, depression, and so on and so forth. So here's an illustration of that. Here's the person's normal diet, their normal amount of fat cells. Now let's say they go through a bit of depression, their emotional mood is really low, so they tend to overeat, or they're bored, so they'll overeat. That's also a component. So because they overeat, not only do their fat cells grow, but they've generated new fat cells. Well, let's say they get over their depression and they want to get back to their lean physique, so they start running and working out. Well, notice that the size of the fat cells diminish, but that extra column of cells are still there. This highlights the point that once you create fat cells, you cannot destroy them. You can only diminish them. Also, if you gain a lot of weight, you're also increasing your set point. So if you gain a lot of weight and you try to lose it and get back to what you were previous, it's going to be much more difficult to maintain that previous weight because you've just established a new set point and your homeostasis will try to maintain a higher set point. We'll talk about that more in class. So we talked about the basal metabolic rate, but what is metabolism in general? Metabolism is a term that is used to describe all chemical reactions involved in maintaining the living state of the cells and the organism. The individual's metabolism rate explains why two people who eat the same may have very different body weights. Do you guys remember what part of the body regulates metabolism through its hormone secretions? That's right, it's the thyroid gland. Physiological explanations for obesity is that six times more common in lower classes women than upper class women, and it's more common in Americans than Europeans. Media might have something to do with this. Advertisements for meals, supersizing certain fast food menu options, and the size of average meals have increased significantly over the last few decades. I mean, just think about a straw that you'll get at Sonic. A Sonic straw is very, very wide. When I was y'all's age, straws were really, really small, so you couldn't suck up as much Coke or as much any other soft drink for that matter. So, and if you look at American food proportions compared to European portions, our portions are much, much larger. Maybe as a result, that's the explanation for why we tend to be overweight. Because of this, there tend to be some emotional issues as well as eating disorders that come up with rapid weight gain. The first that we'll discuss is anorexia nervosa, and this is the intense fear of gaining weight, disturbed body image, refusal to maintain normal weight, and dangerous measures to lose weight. And people who suffer from anorexia will typically go long periods of time without eating, or they'll eat very, very little. All right. 20 to 30%, most people who have anorexia are 20 to 30% underweight, but despite that, they still feel fat, and they're obsessed with losing weight, despite the fact that they're already probably malnourished. Possible causes for this, there are many, and many come from families that are competitive, high-achieving, and protective. Obsessive, rigid, neurotics, and emotionally restrained families typically lead to the development of anorexia. Genetics tend to play a role. With twin studies, if one identical twin is anorexic, the chances of both being anorexic dramatically increase. Culture has to do a little bit with it. Bulimia and anorexia occur most frequently in women living in weight-conscious cultures, like the United States. I mean, if you look at just any magazine with a picture of a woman on it, they're artificially enhanced, they're airbrushed to make this woman look like a ideal woman. And that gives a lot of women a false perception of what they should look like. And so that can have a negative impact on people's self-image. Neurotransmitters. You can also have a deficit of neurotransmitters, which can lead to a negative self-image as well, like serotonin, for instance. The other eating disorder is called bulimia nervosa, and this is when people with this maintain a reasonably normal weight, but in order to do so, they follow a routine of binging and purging. All right, it's a disorder marked by repeated binging episodes. So you might go to a buffet and just gorge at the buffet, and then an hour later you'll go home and throw it all up in order to maintain your weight. Now, this is not healthy at all because you're not getting all the nutrients from the food that you need because you're vomiting it up. Possible causes for this. Now, there's some personality disorders that are associated with this that we'll go into more detail in a few units from now. But 90 to 95% of these individuals are female, and most of them are 14 to 18 years of age. There are treatments for this, and 40 to 50% fully recover from these treatments. However, 20 to 25% fall back into their bulimic behavior. Here's an example of body mass index over age groups. Here's a body mass index comparing men and women. Here's a chart listing the percentage of people who are overweight by country. If you notice, the United States is not number one. Thank goodness. Australia is. And here's another body mass index if you would like to see what your body mass is. And the last thing we'll discuss is basic human motives for hunger and eating is body weight of twins. Identical twins are more similar in body weight than our fraternal twins. So this shows that the genetic factors play a huge role in body weight and metabolism. All right, so I'll see you guys later.